Hello students, welcome to session 1 of reproduction in plants. Students, before starting with the lesson, I would like to share something about plants. Yes students, plants are critical to other life on this planet because they form the basis of all food webs. Most plants are autotrophic, creating their own food using water, carbon dioxide and light through a process called photosynthesis. Some of the earliest fossils found have been aged at 3.8 billion years, and these fossil deposits showed evidence about photosynthesis. So plants, or the plant-like ancestors of plants, have lived on this planet longer than most of the other groups of organisms. At one time, anything that was great and that wasn't an animal was considered to be a plant. Now what were once considered plants are divided into several kingdoms, like Protista, fungi and plantae. Even most aquatic plants occur in these kingdoms. Right? So before starting and before studying about the introduction to plants, I would like to share some evolution about plants, that is plant evolution. So students, basically it was believed that the earth was originally an aggregation of dust and swirling gases about 4.5 billion years ago, and the earliest fossil life forms are 3.8 billion years old, and they contain simpler prokaryotic, means the single-celled cells or single-celled organisms. The atmosphere at that time was mostly nitrogen gas with large portions of carbon dioxide and water vapor. Since life evolved in this atmosphere, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen and nitrogen make up 98% of the organic materials in living organisms. And there was no oxygen in the early atmosphere. So all life existed in an anaerobic environment. Try to recall students. Anaerobic means absence of oxygen. So all life existed in this anaerobic environment billions of years ago. But have you ever gave a thought, students, that why plants are so important? How they came into existence? Yes, if plants hadn't evolved to photosynthesize life on this planet, then this planet would be very different. Would have been very different. So plants produce their food by photosynthesis, and the most important waste product of this process is oxygen, something that most of the animal life on this planet can't live without. Most of the human beings can't live without. As the first plants began photosynthesizing, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere increased. Some of the oxygen in the outer layer of the atmosphere was converted to ozone. Eventually, there was enough ozone in the upper atmosphere to effectively filter out the harmful ultraviolet rays that are highly destructive to living organisms. So this allowed organisms to survive in the surface layers of water and on land. So having an abundant supply of oxygen in the atmosphere also allowed other organisms to break down the complex energy-containing molecules formed by photosynthesis by a more efficient pathway called respiration. And this yields much more energy that can be obtained in an atmosphere without oxygen. And that is why plants are considered so important. Besides these, I would like to share one more thing, that in early life, it was found in the surface waters of the open ocean. Means early life was found in the surface waters. As life became more abundant, essential resources were depleted, and so life became more abundant in areas where there were renewable resources the resources that can be renewed, primarily near shores. Even the rains and waterway carried nitrates and minerals from the mountains and into the water where they are available for the early plants to use. The differentiated coastline also provided a complex habitat where specialization gave some plants a competitive edge over others in that habitat. And in this way, plants came into existence. The plants on land, aquatic plants, and other that survive in different habitats. So in this way, for many scientists, the topic of plants, the research of plants, became more wonderful and more interesting, being complex. So students, this is the reproduction in plants. Reproduction means, students, as we know that we can see a number of trees and plants all around us. We can also see a variety of beautiful flowers around us. How do we get so many plants of the same kind? How do they continue to exist? You must have seen new plants growing from the seeds you threw away after eating a fruit such as apple or mango. So new plants grow when these seeds germinate. These seeds are formed from the flowers of a plant. So flower is actually considered to be the reproductive part of the plant. Students, have you ever thought that do plants which do not flower also multiply? Well, plants have different methods of producing young ones other than reproducing through flowers. And these ensure that plants which do not flower also multiply. So this process of producing young ones from their parents is known as reproduction. Plants which do not flower can also reproduce with the help of their parts like stem, leaves and roots. So we will learn about different methods of reproduction of plants too. Right? So remember students, to produce its kind is a characteristic of all living organisms. The production of new individuals from their parents is what we call reproduction. But how do plants reproduce? There are many different modes. So let us discuss about it. Yes, reproduction in plants. Students, plants reproduce through asexual and sexual methods of reproduction. Asexual reproduction involves the simple division of the plant body into two or more parts or spore formation. So, basically, the creation of a life form by a similar life is called reproduction. Reproduction is the extension of life of a species at a given time. It is a means of perpetuation of the species and also multiplies their number. And by this process, the individuals transmit life to the next generation and thereby ensure the continued existence of living organisms on Earth. Try to imagine, students, that if there was no reproduction, life on this Earth would sooner or later come to an end. So plants basically reproduce. Living organisms reproduce. Here plants reproduce by several methods like asexual and sexual reproduction. So as we discussed, that for plants to survive, they need to reproduce, and they do so sexually as well as asexually. One of the reasons asexual reproduction in plants is so studied upon is the capability of plants to reproduce new plants at a faster rate using the cells from any plant part. One of the perfect examples of asexual reproduction is tissue culture. However, this is laboratory controlled, but there are many more ways that plants are naturally capable of reproducing as usually. But before I get down to explaining what is asexual reproduction, let us first understand that what these two methods mean. Yes, asexual reproduction involves the simple division of the plant body into two or more parts of spore or spore formation. Secondly, new plant body is formed from a single parent, and this happens under favorable conditions. While on the other side, sexual reproduction takes place by the formation of seeds, and it involves two parents and the fusion of male and female reproductive cells called gametes to form a single cell called the zygote. So this happens in sexual reproduction. So there is a much major difference between asexual and sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, the offspring are not produced from the body cells and no fusion occurs. While in sexual reproduction, the offspring are produced by the fusion of male and female gametes. Secondly, in asexual reproduction, the body cells may be formed from the root, stem, leaf or flower, that is from the plant parts. While in sexual reproduction, the sex cells or gametes are obtained or are produced from the male and female sex organs of the flower. So this is what the major difference between asexual and sexual reproduction. So now let us understand these processes in detail. Yes, asexual reproduction. Students, asexual reproduction is the simplest form of reproduction found in plants, and it is of three common forms. First is budding, secondly fragmentation, and thirdly spore formation. And we are going to study about all these three common forms in detail. So students, first let us start with the first common form, the simplest form of reproduction, which is found in plants as well as in other organisms. So in general, we are going to study about budding. Yes, students. Budding is a type of asexual reproduction where new individuals develop as small growths or buds on the surface of the parent organism. So microorganisms such as yeast and hydra reproduce asexually by budding. Now here yeast is an organism, hydra is also an organism, and they reproduce asexually by budding. So here you can see the beautiful diagram of yeast. This diagram shows the process of budding in yeast. So here you can see that this is the first stage, right? This is one such cell. Because of this, budding occurs, and then it starts to divide into two, right? After they form one cell or a diploid cell, they try to detach themselves, and after this process of budding, they divide into many cells. And then they come out of this yeast cell by breaking the membrane, and many such new plants or many such new yeasts develop by budding process. So in this process, basically a small bulb-like cellular growth or outgrowth is formed from the cell called bud. This can be better explained with the help of one more diagram, that is budding in hydra. Here you can see that this is the parent plant. This is the parent hydra. After some time, asexual reproduction occurs by the formation of bud, which is attached to the parent plant, which is attached to the parent organism. And after that, we can see that this bud detaches itself from the parent body. So in this way, many new hydras are formed. So basically, the new organism may break off and live independently or remain attached and live as a colony. Budding is different from binary fission because the offspring and parent are not the same size. Yeast, hydra, sponges and some warts reproduce by budding. So, the ability to produce new individuals asexually is very common in plants. Even under appropriate experimental conditions, nearly every cell of the flowering plant is capable of regenerating into the entire plant. In nature, new plants may be regenerated from leaves, stems or roots that receive an appropriate stimulus and become separated from the parent plant. In most plants, these new plants arise from undifferentiated cells which develop into buds that produce roots and shoots before or after separating from the plant, the parent plant. Right? So in this way, new plant occurs. So this bud keeps on increasing in size and then forms an independent organism which separates from the parent plant. Right? So this was about budding. Budding in yeast and budding in hydra. The second common form or the simplest form of reproduction, asexual reproduction in plants, is fragmentation. Now see, students, fragmentation is very common form of asexual reproduction in the plant kingdom. For example, in algae we can see this. Also we can see this in Spirogyra. This is a beautiful picture of the fragmentation occurring in Spirogyra. So here you can see that there is one nucleus. Septa means it divides this fragment into two. This is the spiral chloroplast which is present in the Spirogyra, and it is divided into two, means it divides into the fragments, and further these fragments are divided into more fragments. So basically, algae such as Spirogyra, which is also popularly called as pond silk, fucus, which is also a type of brown algae, etc., are the slimy, green and small plants which are seen floating on the surface of ponds or in dirty drains, and they reproduce asexually by fragmentation. Here, in this process, the adult organism breaks up into two or more pieces called fragments, which we saw, and each of these fragments grow up to become a new plant. So in this way, reproduction takes place in Spirogyra. The third, very simplest form of asexual reproduction is spore formation, where some plants such as ferns and mosses multiply asexually through spores. So here, what are spores? Yes, spores are microscopic, single-celled or several-celled reproductive bodies that are mostly spherical in shape. Let us see the diagram. Yes, this is a beautiful diagram of spores. Now here, spores, here you can see very small structures. These are spores. So here spores are released when the spore case bursts open. This is the spore case. So when the spore case bursts open, spores are released. And after they are released, they fall down. They fall down on the soil. Right? And here the spores germinate when they land on the food source. So in this way, by spore formation also, many such microscopic single-celled bodies reproduce asexually. So these spores are protected by a thick wall when conditions such as humidity and temperature are unfavorable. So once the conditions for germination are favorable, these spores burst out of the thick wall and they start multiplying and grow into new plants. So in this way, many ferns and mosses, which are known as lower plants, reproduce asexually by the process of spore formation, because they do not have roots, they do not have flowers, and they do not have seeds. So they multiply with the help of spores. Right? So this was all about the asexual reproduction. We will learn about another form of reproduction which is very important, and so we will discuss it in the next session. Right? So before ending this topic, let us revise. Yes, budding is a type of asexual reproduction when new individuals develop as small growths or buds on the surface of the parent organism, while spores are the spatial cells that some individual organisms produce, where a thick, tough outer coating protects the inner cell, usually surrounds spores. So when released by the parent, each spore grows into a separate individual. And so, some examples like fungi, algae and protozoa, ferns and mosses reproduce by spore formation. Right? So that was all about today's topic. I hope you liked today's session. We will meet in the next session with a very important type of asexual reproduction. Till then, enjoy. Have a nice time.